Hi everyone, it's Jen again. This was the end of week 5 of OtomeJam. Hope you all had a good week. I had a very productive week. This week was essentially the week that I started putting the game together. So up until this point, I had basically a bunch of random elements and a plan. An idea of what I wanted to accomplish with all those random elements, but the first 4 weeks, or actually I should say the first 8 weeks of development, because I did start a month ahead of OtomeJam, was just creating the combat system, creating the enemies, creating the boss, creating the map, creating the movement system, and creating like one scene. And creating the GUI. So that really, I on week 9 of development, week 5 development for OtomeJam. This was finally the week that I was actually putting the game together from like start to finish. So it's interesting. Sometimes I run into these parts of development where I'm not exactly sure like how long it's going to take me, even though I generally have a good idea of my workflow. I had sort of anticipated this step taking me like 2 weeks, but I think all the pieces that I built together were strong enough that I was kind of like laying the foundation for building the actual game. As I was creating each separate element, like I had an idea of how it was going to fit together in the larger scheme of the project, that I ended up being able to essentially finish mission 1 in 1 week. What did that entail? It was adding all the events to the locations, having the mission objectives implemented and tracked, having the random chat and random sort of like item puzzle implemented, as well as the scoring system. So this is sort of what my notes look like when I was starting at the beginning of the week of like things that I was planning on doing. I sort of have been laying the foundation for all these systems that I just mentioned in my previous games, because I really like using the whole RPG mechanic of exploring and fighting monsters to facilitate bonding and chatting with the characters. I think that's why I've been kind of like pivoting towards more gameplay elements in my games. But I think that it's still pretty light on the game mechanic side, gameplay element side, compared to like a standard RPG where the primary focus is on the stat building, gearing up, fighting enemies, exploring, and usually like the relationship building with the characters is icing on the cake. Versus in my game, since I'm coming from a visual novel, comics, storytelling background, the gameplay elements are more the icing on the cake. And the primary focus is still on developing the relationships. So planning out the events to take place did happen earlier in development. I just hadn't actually like written it out, but I always had that in mind of how that was going to work. So I guess executing it in a nutshell was easier than I thought it would be, or it was smoother than I thought it would be. But probably it was smooth because I have been sort of refining on this system, especially in Arcane Dice Wars, through both revisions in the main game and Villain's Heart. I learned quite a bit about setting up my chat systems for dungeon exploration. And so I think that the pacing of that dialogue is probably the best that I've made it so far, especially with the way that the movement system is improved and a little bit more snappy. I didn't want the dialogue to be so much that it was taking away from the immersion. Like, I didn't want it to feel like the companion was like constantly talking your ear off. If that makes any sense. All the dialogue that I implement, I try to make it be like meaningful, even if it's not mandatory. So I feel like I'm going off on a little bit on a tangent. Let me talk a little bit about the systems that I implemented. I guess I should start with like the mission system. So the mission system was taken from Arcane Dice Wars. It's essentially the same, where I'm just tracking the player's progress through kind of like the mission attribute of like their conditions, which I have abbreviated as a CON. So every time they complete a task or progress through the mission, then that gets like a +1. And then depending on what number that is, will unlock different events. So all the locations have their own label. And most of the labels that don't have any events that will happen on them look something like this, where it's just getting the location so that when the player like turns around, it can display the correct image. And then it's tracking the player's steps, and for every 5 steps, it's going to flag it as a chance to encounter something. So this encounter here is more heavily weighted in triggering a dialogue with your companion, because there's a certain number of dialogues that I want the player to be able to witness before they leave the dungeon. So that's kind of why I'm weighing it heavier for the first 30 steps. And then there's also a chance to have a puzzle where the player can essentially gamble to get an item. And this gambling is your odds. The odds are more favorable to the player depending on which stat it's checking. So as the player takes more steps in the dungeon, the amount of chatting and puzzles will decrease with just chances of nothing happening. So that way, if they are just wandering in the dungeon like a bunch, then they will eventually start to have a really low chance of anything happening by the time that the unique dialogue runs out and starts going to randomized dialogue. So the way that the randomized dialogue looks is kind of like this. So I am tracking the amount of chat dialogue that's triggered, so that the early dialogue does not repeat and does unfold in a certain sequence. By the time it reaches past 8 unique conversations, it then just does a random like kind of little snippet out of these like 10 choices. So the chances that this will become really repetitive is like almost nothing, because when I go through the playtest, you can defeat all the objectives, even the optional objectives, very comfortably, I would say, in like 80 steps. So the chances of you getting to the point where you're going to be triggering conversations frequently is already going to be decreased by a lot. And then I think having so many random options for the kind of random banter that you get, the likelihood that it's going to become like very repetitive is going to be close to 0 if you even make it to the part where the dialogue starts randomizing. Let's see. And then in the case of the puzzles, I have a list of different difficulties of puzzles. So I have the puzzles graded by like letter grade, and in this first dungeon you can only run into the D and the F encounters, and they have corresponding randomized drops that improve in quality depending on the difficulty of the puzzle. And your chance of solving the puzzle and getting the item reward is increased with how much higher that stat is that it's going to be testing. But you can also choose to pass because it does cost mana in order to kind of try your luck at one of these little gambles. So if you feel like your odds are not good, then it probably would just be better just to pass on it, because your success rate with solving these puzzles will also be a part of your final grade. So the final grading is really just there just for fun, just like a leaderboard of sorts, just so that the player can have like kind of, I guess, if they wanted to try to improve their efficiency, they could. And they would get a little bit of a payout bonus as far as how much the game would give them for in-game currency. But having a poor score wouldn't like penalize the player too much, unless their score was like really, really bad. But I don't think it's that hard to get at least a passing grade of like a C, which would give you some type of a bonus. So that's kind of like the main mechanics that are happening in the exploration. Again, there are certain locations that have set events. So this location has this barrier that you have to solve using your like puzzle solving stats. And there are 3 different barriers. This particular access point tests empathy, which is the highest stat of the 3 social skills that this character has. So that's why I chose this particular barrier, because I know I can defeat it with 100%. Accuracy. Let's just show you here. Power, empathy, and logic for the Esper are both at 5, but you also get your bonus stats from your guide link. So now you're looking at 21, versus 12. This next step I know is location 20. So in the labels, first time you visit this square, it's going to unlock this conversation where Laurent fixes your map for you, basically. And then we can see the number of steps we have, and we can have a little reminder as to where our progress in our mission is. So now it's telling us to destroy the aberration detected in the Northeast region, which I can go straight there. This is also a set dialogue in this particular location, because the player must be on this part of the quest, and they have to hit this tile in order to reach where the aberration is. This next square is based on whether or not you are currently working on the first condition still. So it's letting you know that the monster is right below us.
Right.
And then the dialogue options do have a chance to increase affection stats with the companions. So they're there for exploring different reactions and getting to know the character better, but they are also there to start building those bonding stats. If we move ahead, we run into the aberration. We added a transition there. I'm not going to go through the whole combat. Oh, I did make an update to the combat system. Sorry, I'm lying. Yeah, let's go ahead and go through just these first turn anyways. I tried to make an improvement based on some player feedback that it was difficult to remember, especially with the support cards, what they do. So I changed the hover during this support, when you're selecting the cards to use, to basically give you a little reminder of what things do. So this is telling you it uses your astral stat, your AST. This is just telling you it uses your AST plus your Discord, etc. For all the attack types, it's pretty straightforward. And then for the support cards, which don't actually tell you anything except for their support, when you hover over them, debuffs will say that it like decreases these particular stats. So we can see that corresponds with the effect on the enemy. Okay, let me go ahead and load a different portion. Because I think I want to just show what the random 5-step looks like. So in the beginning I have less than 10 steps right now on this file. And so there's going to be a high chance that it's going to trigger dialogue. Let's say, whoops, I didn't mean to go to the barrier. Let's ignore that for right now. But let's say, you know, the player gets really lost in the beginning and they just keep wandering around in circles and they're not progressing the mission. They will still have the chance to trigger these random events. So in this case, this is one of those item puzzles I was talking about. In this case, it's going to be an empathy challenge, which I have a good empathy stat, so I'm going to say let's go ahead and try it. It looks like it was solved, and so then we did receive a basically healing item from that. The first time you trigger one of these events, it's going to have this little dialogue where the companion explains to you like why this happens and what's going on there. But the next time we trigger it, that conversation isn't going to happen. Just like here, we found this treasure chest. It's our first chest, so he's also going to explain to us like why there's chests in this place. But the next time that we run into a chest, it will not. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and move past this barrier so I can show you another chest. I'm going to go through that again.
Relax.
Now, this was a step-related conversation trigger. So random dialogue, but unique dialogue. That is pretty much gonna happen at least up to the first, like, probably, like, handful of conversations. Just odds-wise, I don't think you'd be able to get through this first scenario. But you can see there, the second chest we got, it did not repeat the conversation. I try to program these things to avoid repeating conversation as much as I can, because I feel like there's nothing more immersion breaking in an RPG than when NPCs repeat themselves. So, random convo there. Yeah, that's pretty much how the whole exploration system is set up. I think there's a good variety between like finding set treasures, having a chance to have these kind of random items appear. Don't always get to reap the reward of it because this was a higher threshold for a guaranteed win, and I failed that roll. When all the objectives are completed, I'm gonna get back to here, and you find the exit, essentially, you can choose to go home.
Had enough?
And then the game will let you know how you performed based on these 6 ways of tracking your the way you were playing. And then based on your grade, you will get a bigger payout bonus for like your in-game currency for like buying items and buying gifts. And I'm gonna plan on having different ways of spending the player money that are mostly optional. But they will make kind of your social building easier the more money you have. But it won't be mandatory for progressing through the game. Okay, I think that's pretty much everything with this week's update that I can think of right now, anyways. I'm not sure right now. I'm still debating on whether or not I want to release the demo in this current state, as I've reached my goal for what I wanted to have for the demo. But since I have another month left of OtomeJam, I'm debating on whether or not I want to start. I want to wait until I implement the life sim elements. I wanted to avoid making the demo too long this time around, so that it feels a little bit more neatly packaged as an experience, as a sampling, as opposed to just being like the first chapter of an incomplete game. I'm going to be working, I think, on starting the whole sim, like life at headquarters aspect of the game, because I think that it's going to end up essentially being like building a second game. It's like there's two different phases in this game. See how far I get after this week, and see how refined it feels or how rough it feels. And if it feels too rough, then I might just go ahead and release the demo as just being mission 1. Because right now, I feel like with the help of the playtesters that I've had, with their feedback, there's not a whole lot more I can think of that I need to iron out right now. Okay, yeah, that's about it. I hope you have a good week, and as always, don't forget to enjoy the process. Bye now.